Sketchbook tour video. Arbores, loqui, latine. The Trees Speak Latin by SAM TARVIT. 4th year honours project. I want to do a project focused on The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater, one of my favourite book series and books in general. I wanted to show how it changed my outlook on life, nature and how I interacted with the world around me, and I wanted to show those thoughts and feelings through jewellery. The sketchbook is laid out in such a way that it is inspired by the notebook that one of the main characters, Gansey, has for his journey of finding the Welsh king, Wayne Glendower. These are mood boards that I looked at the beginning, including forest, natural textures, escapism, silver, Gothic architecture, and occult. These are kind of main themes from the book, plus Gothic architecture and silver, which were things that I wanted to focus on in the beginning. There's also mood boards for the characters from the books, so focusing on their iconography and themes that they embody, and some unusual jewellery like palm cuffs, claw rings, eyeball themed jewellery, and unusual palm rings. This is a view of some lino cut that I did, based on quotes from the book such as "The trees speak Latin," "I will be your hands, I will be your eyes," which are quite famous quotes from the books. This is some very quick sketches I did based on the "I will be your hands, I will be your eyes" quote, where Adam, one of the main characters, sacrifices his autonomy to the forest of Cabeswater and the ley line within. This is very early test that I did of some rings based on the shapes of eyes and the shapes of eyes in tree bark, and I also carved wax with some eyeballs in it to be cast later on. I ended up having 4 or 5 different roads of ideas at this point. This is also another road of idea that I had to make claw rings inspired by ravens, and I did not like these at all, so quickly moved on from them. This is some ley line information that I researched for myself and researched from the book, and how I could use the iconography of the 3 lines intersecting in jewellery. This is continuing on from the ley line research, also how I used silver clay as well. It didn't work the way I wanted it to, but it was very fun experimentation. This is some more wax carving that I did for trees, making the textures in the wax with the eyeball iconography, ley line symbol, and other tree textures. This is more silver clay that I did, trying to get a leaf to essentially cast in silver clay. It did not work very well at all. It is extremely fragile and impossible to work with. I moved on from silver clay after this because it did not do what I wanted it to do. This is another road that I went down, looking at the textures in your hand and your palm, and the textures of leaves, linking again to the quotes from the books and the symbiotic relationship that the characters have with the forest of Cabeswater. This page has more leaf cuffs and tree texture cuffs that I was looking at in sketch forms. This page includes lots of the texture I did in the rolling mill using my lino from previous pages, leaves, leilandi plants, feathers and other natural materials that I found, seeing what different textures I could create in the metal quickly, easily and repeatably. This is some photos of the forest that I took when I was back home visiting my parents. Focusing on the textures of the trees, the textures of the moss on the trees, textures basically. On this page I looked again at more eyes based on the quotes and how sentient the forest is, and some of the quotes saying they will see the characters again, like the trees saying they would see the characters again, so eyeballs was a big thing that I looked into. Wire wrap eyeball rings, which were really fun to do, but they didn't really lead anywhere as an idea, so I moved on with that quite quickly. I then went back and looked at what I really liked about the book, which was the setting of Cabeswater itself. The trees, the surrounding area, the feelings that the characters had when they were in there, and the feelings I have when in actual woods and forests. So I was looking more at that and more quotes. This is interim timeline with hammer textures using different types of hammers, ball peen, mallets, texture hammers, basically whatever I could get my hands on, to recreate the textures on birch trees specifically I was looking at, and how I could recreate those textures in metal. more photos and notes about textures and how I could create them in the metal in my tests. This was looking at the birch bark specifically and the peeling of it, as when I was doing my hammered samples, most of them were bending all weird and I didn't know how to combat them, and then I was outside looking at a tree and I seen that it peeled itself, so I wanted to incorporate that into my jewellery and move on with the textures that I was doing because I really liked them. This was some paper models that I made to see how I could move the metal in ways that could create jewellery rather than just having test samples. So this is for brooches, cuffs, pendants, many different ideas were going on here. This is more information about how I could bend them into cuffs or put textures on them, and whether I wanted to have the natural kind of ripped edges and how I would make that in metal, or have the more straight flat edges like cut down timber rather than trees themselves. A mood board for unusual themed jewellery, focusing on different textures and natural motifs. Sketch ideas for rings and cuffs and bracelets. This is kind of one of my favourite pages, showing different texture samples that I was doing, whether it be the rolling mill on the right or the hammer on the left, and how I could create different textures, and I ended up going on to call the hammered ones bark quite a lot, because that is what it reminded me of. It looked like the peeling bark off the tree. I had a lot of different compositions for brooches and different samples and how I could put them all together, taking my flat sort of roller mill textures and the very three-dimensional hammer textures and how I could attach them together into cohesive designs. Different compositions of the hammered bark textures and how I could put them all together. They are very sharp when they're like this, so it was also trying to figure out how to make them less sharp while still keeping the intricate designs that they have. Again, more information about how I could layer them together, whether that be using rivets or other joining methods, and again how to take the sharp edges off. I ended up feeling like they were missing an element, whether that be colour or texture or something else, so I was using aluminium as a substitute for silver. And at this point I'd decided I was going to make brooches, as the edges were so sharp I felt they needed a barrier away from the skin to be usable at this point. Again, mixing wood in as well, because it was still feeling like it was missing something at this point. So it was tests with wood, square cut lumber, the aluminium samples, the copper samples, many different things going on here. More joining methods. I was trying to rivet 3 or 4 of the little copper samples together and it was not working. The samples become so thin when hammering them that it's very difficult to attach them to anything without precise care, and putting rivets through them required too much force on a specific area that would just rip. And I was also trying to rivet them onto a piece of bark which was also very fragile, so it was many things working against me at this point. I ended up going back and looking at my photos that I took of the forest and looking at what these photos had, what my designs didn't have, because there was still something that wasn't fitting right and I was getting very frustrated at my work at this point and I didn't know how to move it forward. And I noticed that on the photos in the book, many other things that I was looking at mentioned aliveness and colour, and I knew I had to bring that in, so my next thought was to use enamel and try and bring all that bright colour that show the forest is alive into my work. So I've researched into lichen quite a lot, because that lichen and moss are the two things that kind of spring to my mind about the forests rather than the leaves, because the leaves are above you and all the lichen is at your eye level, really, and you can see it no matter where you are, whether it's on the ground, on the trees, on bushes, on trunks of trees, it's everywhere, and I love it so much now that I've done all this research for it. I ended up going to Emma Wilson's studio over the Easter break, summer break, whatever break that was, and she taught me quite a lot about enamel, and I got to do my very first test samples there, and it was the spark that I needed for this project. I was so invested in it from this point on. I loved it so much. The enamel was it's one of my favourite things I've ever done in jewellery, and I'm glad I got to experience it with this project, and it's soared me straight to the finish line. The talk by Drew that he did in the studio was also something that was incredible for me, for my work, for me personally. Seeing how he displays work that he did in university 20 something years on was really inspiring to me because I felt I didn't have anything at that point that I could still be proud of in 20 years. But now finishing this project, I do feel proud of this stuff, and I feel I will still be proud of it in 20 years and want to show it off. So going back to these brooches, I was then moving the enamel on with the copper and the lumber textures that I had, trying to play around with how they could work together, how they would attach together, if they looked correct or not together, and trying to recreate the lichen growing on different woodland elements and tree elements through the lichen and the copper in brooch form. These are some quick sketches that I did of different shapes for the copper to then put enamel on to become earrings or brooches or cuffs, or many different ideas going on here, incorporating the textured copper, the enamel and some wood as well, because I thought those were the three elements that I liked the most that I wanted to bring forward, that incorporated the woods and forests and trees and the book setting in one. Some research that I did into enamel colours and textures and different artists using enamel, and being able to see what other people create with enamel and the textures they can get out of it is incredible. Very inspiring. I ended up going on a quick little road trip with some friends, and getting to see this very rare lichen in person was incredible, and it inspired me. It still inspires me at the end of this project as much as it did at this point, looking at the different natural colours that were formed in the lichen and the different sides of it. The foliose lichen, having the black and white back and the bright coloured front, was just incredible to see in person. Doing more textures and different samples at uni, taking the test colour enamel samples from flat pieces of copper and bending them to create a more three-dimensional shape, the way actual lichen has in their different forms, and trying to figure out how I could attach those onto something else rather than just having this piece of enamel that can't be used on anything. That was very difficult but quite fun to figure out. I then went on to test how I could attach real lichen to my textured copper samples, and if I could incorporate that into my designs rather than just using purely the enamel samples. It was very fun to do, trying different methods of attachment like rivets or sewing, many different things. It was really fun and I learned quite a lot from just this. This was me deciding to do brooches and earrings, not armoured ornaments, as the wearer can still see them, as that was something that I wanted from the beginning. These are the basis for some of my final brooches, and some very big decisions were made here about how I was going to attach the natural material onto the copper and the order in which I was going to do things, still playing around with compositions as well. More final brooches, how I was going to incorporate the enamel and the natural material, the different orders I was going to put the brooch backs on, as you can't drill through the enamel once it's put on. You can't really use heat after it's been put on because it changes the enamel, but using heat and solder beforehand, before putting the metal in the kiln to melt the enamel, is all trial and error basically, and it took me quite a while to get to this point. Focusing on earrings because that was something that I didn't know I wanted to create at the beginning, but through my enamel samples and just testing around it in the workshop, it was something that I found could be made very quickly, very easily, very repeatably, and they look incredible. They look so much like and I really like it so much. Doing the photo shoots for the posters and for degree show have been incredible to see my work in a finished capacity, and knowing that I've managed to take this there was incredible. This first photo shoot was one of the best things I ever did, honestly. Testing stand ideas for my degree show and how I want everything to be displayed was very fun. It doesn't completely look like this in the end, but doing these quick tests with the cans on my desk and doing little quick sketches was very helpful to get the ideas in my head onto paper. The final photo shoot that I did was the best decision I made in this project, if I am being honest. Being able to see all the details in my work from someone else's perspective was incredible, and seeing what they picked up on when I've been staring at them for so long, I no longer see the lichen for the leaves, essentially. So seeing the details someone else can take out of all these individual things was incredible. Detail shots of the enamel look spectacular, and I can stare at these photos all day every day. These are also some earrings that I did before, very much the same, as I love all the details that were managed to pick up with camera. The brooches look so good, having the sticks and the real lichen incorporated into these was a really great decision on my part, if I do say so. And they just look so alive and so real, like you've just found them on the floor of the forest, which is something that I'm so glad that it looks like. I'm very proud of these. After this project, I hope to continue my love of enamel that I found and incorporating natural elements into my jewellery moving forward. I have a few ambitions after uni. I want to take part in a residency and make a collection based on the Scottish Highlands and Scottish landscape in somewhere real rather than a fictional place, which would be great. And I've got other ideas of maybe doing an ecology course and learning more about lichen, as it's something I'm quite passionate about now. This project has been incredible, and looking back through my sketchbook has shown me how far I have come from the beginning to where I am now, and how excited and hopeful I am for the future of what I'm going to create next.